I don't know what kind of dad you had or have. We all have different kinds, they all have different stories and different backgrounds and come from different places, but the good news is that our Heavenly Father is perfect and that He loves you unconditionally. And so it's His day more than any other Father's Day today. That's what we're celebrating for sure. I'm going to give you just kind of a snapshot of my own growing up a little bit and my dad. You got a picture of that? This was me many moons ago. Good times, huh? That picture was taken one of the tracks somewhere. We used to go, I don't know, for like 3 or 4 years we went to 3 tracks every weekend to race. We'd start on Friday night and we would end on Sunday afternoon and come home, and we'd do it all over again the next week. And my parents were rock stars when it came to that, because we had a Suburban and a trailer, and all of my friends called my parents their parents, called my dad their dad, and so they would just throw their bikes in the back and their stuff, and we would head out and we would go race, and that's what we did all weekend long. And we stayed in hotel rooms and got kicked out of a few hotel rooms, and it was good times growing up. But whatever my dad did, he always supported whatever I wanted to do, and he found ways to spend time with me. And I would describe my dad however you would describe yours. We all come from different places. My dad was my hero because he was always there. I knew if I had an issue, he was right there behind me. He was one step behind me all the time, wherever I was going. He was always there. And there's a song by Foo Fighters. Anybody listen to Foo Fighters? Okay, Foo Fighters, Hero. I heard that for the first time and I was like, oh, that's my dad right there. He's ordinary. Watch my hero go, he's ordinary. I'm like, oh, that's my dad. There's nothing extraordinary about him at all. I mean, he's got thick Coke bottle glasses and has since he was 2 years old, and there's nothing spectacular about him at all, except that he's consistent and he's always there. He's just ordinary, but he's always there. And but God, as our Heavenly Father, is anything but ordinary. And the role of the Father was His idea, was God's idea. For whatever reason, God chose the relationship between a father and a child to give us a picture of His relationship with us. Whatever He wanted to use, He picked that illustration and He said, okay, guys, here it is. I'm your father. You're my child. I'm adopting you as my child, as my kid. And He used that relationship, and that's what we're going to look at today as we open the Word, is the role that God set forth, that He said, this is my relationship with you. So regardless of what kind of relationship you've had over the years with your dad, whether it's really good or you don't know him at all, or whether it was contentious, the relationship and the role that we have with our Heavenly Father, that's the one that He's setting forth. That's the groundwork that He's laying to say, this is how I want to relate with you. And so whether you had a great relationship like I did with my dad, or maybe it wasn't so good, we tend to look at that relationship with our earthly dad and draw parallels with our relationship with God. And sometimes that's not correct. You understand what I'm saying? Because we know our earthly dad is going to react in a certain way, we just assume that God reacts the same way to the same kind of thing. Let me give you an example. When I was a kid growing up, a curfew was set, whatever time the curfew was. Like, let's say it's 11 o'clock. If it was 11:01, I was late. 11:01 or 12:01, I was late. It didn't matter. 1 minute after whatever time he set, that was it, and the line was drawn. And so there was many a times I was in my car going 90 miles an hour down 21st Street trying to get home on time, and in my car it would go 11:01, and I just go turn around, go back to where I was, because you might as well make it worth it. You're going to get grounded anyway. Yeah, that's just the way my mind worked, man. I was trying, but I didn't get there. Yeah, go back, you might as well. I don't know. Not very wise in my teenage years, but I probably would have got a little more grace, but I didn't find out what grace was till a long time later. Oh, goodness. But we take on the characteristics of our dad, whether you like that or not. Like my dad, one of the things that has bugged me since I was a young kid is when my dad would be working on something, he would hold his mouth a certain way. It kind of, I don't know, he'd be like wrenching on something. And I'd be like standing there next to him watching him going, I am never going to hold my mouth like that, not ever. That's ridiculous looking. And then I get in my 20s and I'm working on something, I'm like, oh, I did it. So I'd be like, but we find ourselves, whether we like it or not, we take on the habits of the people that we're around. You know, our parents, we begin to act like them. You know, have you ever said, I'm never going to say what my dad said? I'm never going to say that to my kid. You know, of course I have, for sure. I'm never going to be like that. And then you find yourself saying the exact same thing. You're like, oh, my dad just came out. I didn't even know I had that. But we take on those characteristics, and some of those are learned behavior, and some of those are DNA. Some of those are just, we can't help it. You know, I'm lucky because my dad still has all his hair. I'm hoping I'll keep mine a little bit longer. I know it's thinning, but I'm hoping that I'll keep it a little bit longer. And so some of those things we have a choice over, and you know, we can form, but some of those things we don't. It's just a physical thing. We're born with it because they had it. We look like them. My hands are just like my dad's hands. They're real rough. And they've been that way since I was a teenager. It's just the way it is. It's just, I know I'm going to have thin skin like he does right now when I get a little bit older. It's just the way it is. Can't change that. It's just DNA. The other things, you know, you can change, but we take on the characteristics. And spiritually speaking, with my Heavenly Father, I take on His holiness. It's not my holiness. It's not anything I've had anything to do with. I don't have any holiness that belongs to me. I wasn't born with that. That's not who it is. But I take on His holiness. It's not for me. It's because I'm His kid. Because I bear His name. Also, when I was a teenager, that was when Dukes of Hazzard was out. And I wanted to drive like that real bad. And so I practiced here in town. And you know the S curve that's right there on Manana as you come off of Prince right there. Yeah, I did my best to drift around that, and wound up in a couple people's yards sometimes. And so inevitably I would get a ticket, many tickets in high school. And but 90% of the time I would get pulled over, and the cop would ask me for my license and registration. I would hand it to him, and then he would stop and he would look down in the car and he'd say, "Are you Tommy Sneed's son?" "Yes, sir." He'd say, "Okay, well, let me take you home." So most of the time I didn't get a ticket, but he would follow me to my house. And as soon as inevitably, this happened multiple times, as soon as we got on my street, the lights would come on. Right as we get in my driveway. You know, it's like, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. The whole neighborhood's up, looking out the window to what's happening. And yeah, they're bringing me home again. Thanks. Appreciate it. Just give me a ticket, please. All I want is a ticket. But I bore his name, and that afforded me a benefit or two growing up, and I abused that a little bit growing up. It wasn't until I was about 27 years old that I figured that out and had to go back to my dad and apologize for, dragging his name through the mud as I was a kid and causing him some discomfort through the neighborhood and some explanations to his friends. But the more I spend time with God, the more I spend time with my dad, the more I look like him. The more I spend time with God, the more I look like him. The more I take on his characteristics, the more, you just watch your dad do something and you figure out that's how you do it. And then you try and he goes, no, like this, and you begin to do it and you figure out, hey, I can do this. It's the same way with God. As I watch him do it, as I look into his word and I study him and I find out who he is and how he operates, and I go to do that, and then he corrects me and the Spirit's there and people are there, and I just become more and more like him. And in this relationship with him, this is where he set the groundwork for how a dad is to relate to his family. And so we're going to look at three things today. And the first one is that the father is the spiritual leader. And obviously when we look at God, he is the spiritual leader. I mean, he came before us. We want to look at the story of God from the paradise he created for man in the first place. He was the leader. He set it out. Here's the garden. Here's every good thing. Here's everything you ever needed. And he laid it out there for us, and he put it at man's feet. And then the fall of man came, and God's chasing after him again. And he goes, okay, here's the law. And then through the law, we realize that we can't solve our problems ourselves. We need somebody bigger than us. I read a quote one time, and I don't know who said it, but they said, you can't solve a problem with the same level of intelligence that created it. So when we try to fix ourselves for the problems that we find ourselves in, most of the time we're just digging a bigger hole for ourselves. Because I need something with more intelligence than me. I need something more than me to help me get out of the hole that I'm in. And then out of the law, we see the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. His sacrifice, not ours. Not the same level of righteousness to fix our problem. Different level of righteousness. Not only the same level of intelligence, but the different level of righteousness to fix our issue. His righteousness, not mine. His is greater than me. I need him and his righteousness to cleanse me. I can't cleanse myself. I can't make it happen. I need him. And then out of that, the redemption. And it's the same story that we find everywhere. A kid screws up, and then after learning his lesson, the dad comes in and saves the day. And the relationship is restored. That's the story of God and man in a nutshell. We're going to be in Ephesians today and looking at this, and this is written for human relationships, but I also want you to see it through the eyes of the relationship between God and us as his kids. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22 through 30. Talking about the relationship between a wife and a husband. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to her husband in everything. And then check this out. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, to cleansing her by the washing of the water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. It's incredible to me, a lot of times somebody will take this verse and they'll just focus on the submit part of the wife. Hey, you're supposed to do that. And then they forget the whole second part of this whole thing. And the whole second part of this is why it's so easy for the wives to submit. Because everything that the husband does is for the wife and for her benefit. Everything that God does is for us. Everything that He has done is for us. And so it is very easy for me to submit to Him. Because I know that what He's doing is for my benefit. If it wasn't, if He never did anything for me, it would be a little difficult. If I had to conjure something up to make Him appear or work, it would be a little bit difficult for me to submit. But it's very easy because everything He does is for me, is for you. His whole life is chasing you down. His whole life is in relationship with you. To have that, to build that, to grow that, to make that more. That's what He's all about. That's what this book is full of. Is Him chasing you down. Everything He does is for your benefit. So it's very easy to submit. In the same way, guys, if you're a guy in this room, that's what our marriage is supposed to look like. That everything we do is for the benefit of our wife. Then the submitting part is very easy. But if we're selfish and we hoard and we are not who we are supposed to be, it makes the other a little bit difficult. Ephesians 6, the first chapter here. Now we're talking about kids. And I love to give my kids this lesson. I throw out the first part and forget the second part, but I try to remind them. It says this: children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Check it out. That it may go well with you, and that you may have a long life on this earth. Again, whose benefit? Yeah. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. This is the training and the instruction. And the training is kind of on-the-job training, if you want to look at it that way. It's the stuff that happens every day. I had I'll call it a privilege now. I would not have called it a privilege then. When I was a kid growing up, my dad had his own business, and so you worked. That's just what you did. You were a part of it. It was a family business, and because of that, I'm 7 years old out there with window cleaner and a rag, spraying the wheels down and wiping the wheels, because that's what I can reach on cars. He had a car dealership, so that's what I did, man. And just go out there and squirt it down, and then go through, and everything was already vacuumed, but as people test drove them and stuff, they'd get rocks or grass in there, so I'd go through and pick out the rocks in the grass. It was just something to do as a job, and I used to hate it. As a kid, you want Saturday mornings to watch cartoons and hang out and do that kind of stuff. And I got to eat my cereal while I watched cartoons, but as soon as the cereal was done, we were off and we were working. And I used to string that out just as long as I possibly could. You're eating one little piece of cereal at a time. By the time you get done, man, it's barely staying together in the milk. You know what I'm saying? It's not even good anymore, but you don't care. But that's the training. As we do life with God, He instructs us. We see His heart. We hear His voice. We find His instruction. And that's in everyday life. That's in your marriage, in your relationship with your kids, at your job, with people that frustrate you, with road rage. Anybody else deal with that every now and then? I did on the way here. There's a guy in front of me. He's going real slow, and internally, I'm like, "Come on, pedal faster, Grandpa." You know. But we'll get there. I still have some issues to work on. I'm saying, but that's on the job training. That's in the middle of life. As life happens, you hear the whisper of God. You're reminded of what you've been taught. And then as we get together small group wise, as we're listening this morning, different things, as we're studying the Word, that's the instruction that we get from His Word. That's what He brings to mind as we're doing on-the-job training. It's all right here. And He's bringing us up in the training and instruction. And as dads, we pass that on. I was always under the impression that that was Mom's job. That going to Sunday school was Mom's job. We went to church when I was a kid until, I don't know, I was pretty young, and I don't remember the story, but my dad tells a story that he had a talk with me one morning, and that I was going to be nice. And we had this talk all morning long that I was going to be nice, and I was going to go to my class, and I was going to do what they asked me to do. And I agreed to all of that. And as he dropped me off in the nursery and he turned around to walk away, he said he got about 5 steps away and he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the room. And he turned around to look, and there was a teacher on the floor grasping her shin, and I guess I had kicked her in the shin with the hard leather shoes that I had at the moment. And as soon as he walked around the corner, I guess I told him I was going to go. She didn't have to pull me. She didn't have to pull me. So I guess that was the last time I went to church as a kid. But for some reason I always had that in my mind of the teaching part was Mom's job. The on-the-job training stuff, that was Dad's job. You know, you learn that stuff as you work with him, but if there's anything that's going to be taught, that's kind of Mom's job. But God breaks it down in here, and as I was a young dad, this caught my attention. It's my job. It's my job to teach my kids. And that was difficult for me to know how to do that. I didn't have a clue how to teach my kids. I really didn't. I had to go through and find stuff and ask people and talk to people and what do you do and how do you keep their attention? You know, I don't know how to keep the attention of a 5-year-old kid. You know, horses and stuff, I don't know. You know, toys, how can I teach him with toys? I don't know. But went through and figured it out. And I was, the best time that I had with this with my kids, my daughter was in 7th grade. And my job at that time allowed me to take her to school every day. And so we would leave the house every morning an hour before she was supposed to go to school. And we would go to this coffee shop that was right across the street from her school. And we spent an hour together every morning. And sometimes I brought stuff to look at, stuff to talk about out of the Bible or whatever. And we would do that. And sometimes it was just life. And we talked about boys and mean girls and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But that year that I spent with her in the morning was the best year, and it kind of laid the groundwork for the rest of our interaction together through even today. Now with my son, I tried to do the same thing, and that worked like a lead balloon. Did not work at all. Like he would look at me and just eat. Like I would ask him a question, I don't know. I don't know. That's about all I got out of him. That was it. I'd read something and say, hey, what do you think about that? Oh yeah. No, I mean, what do you think about that? That's pretty cool. Had to find a new way to do it. And with Jordan, it was either in the car driving, that's where we had our conversations, or it was while we were working on something. We had to be doing something else in order for that communication and stuff to take place. But I finally figured that out, and we were able to get that done and make it happen. But it's two different things. But this training and instruction, God's giving that to the man. And God's taking it on in His relationship with us. I'm here to teach you. I need you to come spend time with me. I need you to crack out some moments in your day, wherever that is. Whether you're getting up an hour early and you're sitting in the parking lot before you walk into work, or whatever the case may be, but I need you to carve out a few moments for me so that we can have that time and I can speak to you and you can hear my voice. And in my life, when I have carved out those moments in time, that's when I'm my spiritual best. But like all of you, I'm sure, life gets busy, life gets overwhelming. There's an ebb and flow of life, and sometimes it just works itself out, and I get in the habit of not doing that, and I find myself longing for it, trying to create it, and needing to come back to it. Number 2, the father is the lover of the family. Now, I don't know what your earthly dad is like, but God the Father is the lover of the family. And in my family, my dad is the lover of the family. He cries more than anybody else, and he hugs more than anybody else, and that's kind of his deal. My mom didn't come from that kind of family. My mom came from a family that they never said I love you. They never hugged. That's just the way it was. And my dad tells a story when they were dating, he would hug her and she would just like, I don't know what to do. And I have 2 older sisters, and both of them will tell you as they grew up, because my parents had children young, as they grew up, my mom had to learn to love because it was difficult. So my older sister had a different mom than my middle sister did. And I had a different mom than either one of my sisters did, because by the time she got to me, she figured it out. So I was the lucky one. But she had to figure out how to love. And so whether you come from a house that, was real loving, or you came from a house that, didn't know how to make that work, didn't know how to communicate that, when we come to God, He is the lover of the family. And His example to us is that we need to be loving as well. It's His action that we are loved, because God is love. That's who He is. And so as we relate to Him, we are loved on by Him. And in this Ephesians, check this out. Verse number 25 of chapter 5. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing and the water through the word, to present her to Himself without stain or blemish. Find a way to love on your spouse. Find a way to love on your kids. Sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes, man, you look at them and you're like, all I want to do is strangle you. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, it's fact of matter. Sometimes, man, whether it's your spouse or your kid, all you want to do is strangle them. But God the Father is the lover of the family. And He set in the relationship for us to be the lover of the family. And just like the kid who went off and did his own thing, learned his lesson and came back, and the dad just loved him, that's our job. And I want to suggest something to you this morning too. That's our job as a church. There's going to be people that walk through that back door, come into this place, that have had it a little bit rough and just need to be loved on. Guess what? That's our job. We're the lover of the family. We take that on. It's not our job to, like I said before, to judge or separate or put them in categories. It's just our job to love. How are we to love? Just like Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her, considered her needs more than Himself. The focus was her. And why is for her benefit. It's hard to love selfishly. It is. It's difficult. That's like more like a teenage infatuation. You know what I mean? That's a selfish love. But to love someone unconditionally, to love someone for their benefit, not yours, that's a whole different action. That's a whole different motive. That's how we're supposed to love, for their benefit. Her cleansing, her washing. And number 3, the Father is our example. Based on our earthly father, we're going to form an opinion of God the Father, and we're going to look like Him. And God has given us the example that we are to follow. Number 1 is submission. We submit out of reverence for who He is. That's our first interaction with God. That I recognize You as God, that I place You on the right place as God, and so as God, I'm going to submit to You out of reverence. And out of that reverence and the submission becomes trust, because He loves on me. As He loves on me and I realize it's for my benefit, I begin to trust. And as I trust in Him, He becomes alive in me. And then I can love. I can transfer that love that He's given me to somebody else. And I can love Him back. And out of that love, I begin to emulate His character. Take on His character as He works in me. It's not automatic. It's time. It's experience. As I experience You working in my life, it's easier for me to submit to You. It's easier for me to love You. Because I see You faithful. I find You faithful in my life. But when I first come to God, it's not out of the experience, it's out of reverence, because I recognize who You are. And so wherever you are this morning in your spectrum, in your relationship with God, whether you're in love with Him and He's been so faithful to you that you have no choice but to love Him back and love others, or whether you're looking at Him and you go, God, I recognize that You are God. My life's a mess. And hindsight's 20/20, but I don't know where You're working yet. But I'm going to submit to You out of reverence for who You are. As we go through those motions, we find Him faithful. As we spend time with Him, we find Him faithful. As He works in our life, we find Him faithful. And let me just add something real quick on that note. I've talked to several friends of mine that say, you know what, God's not faithful because this happened. I was talking with a guy last week does a lot of body work for us. And he said, you know what? He said, I just can't deal with it when children get sick. He said, you know, it's one thing when an adult gets sick and they die. It's a whole different thing when a child gets sick and they die. I blame God for that. And I said, well, God's either good or He's not. He's either all good and He's all faithful, or He's not. You're either going to trust Him or you're not. Do I understand the reasons behind all that? No, I don't. I'll just be honest with you, I don't. I don't know why some get sick and some don't. Why some die and some don't. I don't know that. But maybe my level of intelligence at this moment isn't supposed to understand that. I'm just supposed to trust. That God, you know. That you have a reason. That you have a rhyme. That you're still loving us even though. So regardless of what happens, I'm going to love you. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to trust you. Regardless of what happens, I know that you have a different level of understanding than me. It's kind of like a dad walking in a store with a kid, and they walk through the aisle, and the kid's like, "Oh, I want that." No, you can't have that. I want that, and they scream. You know what I'm talking about? You've been there. Any parents been there? Am I the only one? Seriously? Come on, man. Yeah. And you have to go have a talk outside? Yeah. There's a higher level of understanding that comes from a parent that the kid doesn't have. And the kid doesn't understand, but the parent does. In the same relationship, me and God, I only have a certain level of understanding and I don't get it. But He's good all the time. And just like a kid putting his hand in his dad's hand and walking out the door, not knowing where they're going or when they'll be back, but fully trusting that the dad knows what's going on and will take care of him, I'm going to put my hand in God's hand. I don't have the same level of understanding. I don't understand everything that's going to go on. I don't understand everything that's going to happen today, but I'm still going to trust. He's our example. And as I trust Him, as I lean into Him, as He works in my life, I find Him faithful. And fathers today, dads today, take that example down into your own life. Let's disseminate that same kind of thing into our families. Let's love on them. Let's do our best to be an example. And sometimes the example is, I screwed up. And I apologize. I didn't want it to turn out like that. Didn't mean for it to turn out like that, but it did. And let's move on. Can you forgive me for that? Sometimes that's the example that they need. And let's be the lover of our families. Let's be the ones that let them know how much they are loved, how much they are cared for, how much they are treasured. So when they lay their head on the pillow at night, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. We're going to jump into the holy place real quick and spend some time with God. If you have your family here today and you want to gather them up and pray for each other and pray over each other, I really encourage you to do that. If you don't have your family here with you today, then we are a church family. We can get together and make our church family, and we can pray over each other today. But let's spend a few moments today, number one, leaning into who He is. Acknowledging our trust, acknowledging who He is, our reverence for Him, the position He sits in, and asking Him to work in us. And then let's spend some time with each other and praying for each other. So let's go ahead and jump into that.